Hey, welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're going to tackle a huge question, one that gets right to the heart of who we are. It's a classic debate, our inner world versus our outer world. So yeah, let's dive right in. So let me just ask you, straight up, what really makes you you? Is it some kind of deep internal wiring, your personality? Or is it more about the world you grew up in, the culture that kind of handed you a script for how to live? That's the big puzzle we are going to unpack today. All right, so first things first, let's make sure we're all on the same page. When I say personality, this is what we're talking about. It's your typical way of thinking, feeling, and acting. It's that consistent you that shows up over and over again, And it's shaped by all sorts of things. Some we see and some we don't. Now, you might think this is a new debate, but nope. Way back in the 1930s, a really interesting group of thinkers decided to wrestle with this exact puzzle. And what they created became known as the Culture Personality School. And these weren't just any thinkers. They were a bold group of American anthropologists who did something pretty radical for the time. They mashed up psychology, the study of the mind, with anthropology, the study of societies. Their whole goal was to figure out scientifically that connection between how we're raised and who we end up becoming. So the first big idea to come out of this school was this really fascinating kind of top-down theory. It basically suggested that a culture is defined by the collective personality of its people. The main person pushing this idea was an anthropologist named Ruth Benedict. Her big argument was that a culture isn't just a random jumble of customs and traditions. She saw it as a whole, almost like a person, with its own unique and consistent personality. And to actually label these cultural personalities, she borrowed these two really cool concepts from ancient Greek philosophy. A culture could be Apollonian, named after Apollo, the god of reason and order. Think peace, cooperation, discipline. Or it could be Dionysian, named after the god of wine and passion. Think ambition, emotion, and individualism. And this is where it gets really interesting. Check this out. Benedict didn't just talk theory, she applied it. She compared two Native American tribes, and the differences were stark. The Zuni were a classic Apollonian society, where everything from raising kids to religious ceremonies was all about the group. And then you had the Kwakiutl, a total Dionysian culture, where individual achievement and ambition were the name of the game. Okay, but what if Benedict had it all backwards? A whole new wave of thinkers, led by her own student, believe it or not, came along and just flipped the whole argument on its head. And that student was Margaret Mead. She looked at the same question and came to the exact opposite conclusion. She said, no, no, no. It's not that our personalities create culture. It's that culture is this powerful force, like a sculptor, and our personalities are the clay it shapes from the moment we're born. Mead's most famous work actually took her all the way to Samoa, and what she found there was a game changer. She noticed that being a teenager in America was, famously stressful and chaotic. But in Samoa, it was a pretty calm, easy transition. Her conclusion was stunning. Teenage angst isn't a biological fact of life. It's a cultural invention. And if you need more proof, look at this. Mead's study of 3 tribes in New Guinea. This just blew people's minds. She found one tribe where both men and women were gentle, another where both were aggressive, and in the third, the Chambali, the gender temperaments were the complete opposite of what we'd expect in the West. The point was crystal clear. What we think of as naturally masculine or feminine is mostly defined by our culture. So, what do we do with this? We've got 2 totally opposite but pretty compelling theories. Personality shapes culture, or culture shapes personality. Well, the next phase of the school basically said, hey, why not both? It's a two-way street. Right, so later thinkers, guys like Ralph Linton, Abram Gardiner, and Cora Dubois, they decided this either-or thing was too simple. They saw it as more of a dynamic feedback loop. Culture shapes us, for sure, but then our personalities help maintain and even change that culture over time. And this led them to a new idea, something they called the basic personality. The thinking here is pretty simple, really. Every society has these core ways of doing things, how they raise kids, their family structures, that sort of thing. And these shared experiences create a kind of common psychological foundation for everyone in that society. But they kept refining it. The idea evolved into what's called the modal personality, and this was a bit more sophisticated, a bit more, statistical. It basically says, look, obviously not everyone in a culture is identical. But if you took a survey, you'd find a personality type that is the most common. It acknowledges that shared pattern, but leaves room for all the wonderful weirdos and individuals who don't fit the mold. Okay, so after all that back and forth, what's the verdict? What's the real legacy of the Culture Personality School? Warts and all. Where did they get it right? And where did they maybe miss the mark? No matter what you think of their methods, their biggest contribution is just undeniable. Before them, psychology and anthropology were kind of in their own separate corners. These thinkers built a bridge between those two worlds, and we've been using it ever since. They totally changed the game for how we see the connection between our minds and our societies. But of course, it wasn't all perfect. The school got hit with some pretty heavy criticism, and for good reason. Critics pointed out that boiling down an entire complex culture to one or two personality traits is way too simple. It can easily lead to stereotyping. Plus, they never really explained the exact how, like what's the mechanism that does the shaping. And to top it off, later researchers went to the same places, like Samoa, and came back with totally different findings. So there was some real issues. So here's the bottom line. The culture personality school, yeah, it was flawed, no doubt about it. Some of its methods were questionable, and some conclusions were too broad. But what's so important is that it started a massive, vital conversation. A conversation we're still having today about that delicate dance between who we are on the inside and the world we live in on the outside. And that really brings this whole big conversation right back to you, to your life. This isn't just some dusty old academic debate. It's a lens you can use to look at your own experience. So think about it. How has your culture, your family, your town, your country shaped who you are? And maybe even more important, how do your actions, your choices, your unique personality, how do you shape your culture in return?